At the end of the last episode, I was doubting the survivability of 70 kilometers of vertical freefall. Well, let's see how that goes. Don't pass out yet, don't pass out yet, don't pass out yet. Now you may pass out. That's gotta hurt, but Val shows no sign of pain. Do Kerbals actually have a nervous system? Or are they just like Kith, supported by bladders or whatever? Well, I don't know what I was stressing about. That was completely safe. So having tasted my first glimpse of the infinite void that lies beyond the cradle of Kerbin's atmosphere, the next thing I'm gonna do is head on into orbit, right? Well, we're all entitled to dream. The reality, however, is that with all the 1.25 meter parts at my disposal, I will not be getting into orbit under 3 times normal gravity using less than 30 parts. Even flinging a science package up to the poles is way beyond what I can accomplish right now. And the reason why is maths. Now I really should not be trying to do maths, but since I can't get the pre-release for Kerbal Engineer working, then manually plug in the the rocket equation is pretty much my only option. So here's the rocket I used to escape the atmosphere, which under 3 times normal gravity is literally capable of launching straight up and falling straight down. This I have manually calculated to contain roughly 12 kilometers per second of delta V. Or what I should say is that's the delta V it would have if I wasn't hacking gravity. Since I am hacking gravity, I'm pretty sure what I should be doing is changing the value of G somehow to account for the gravity hack. But since I'm not really sure how to do that, I'm just going to run with equivalent values for delta V. So this rocket has the equivalent of 12 kilometers delta V under normal gravity. Now by comparing this to what I would normally use under normal gravity for the same flight plan, which has only 1.6 kilometers delta V, my best guess is that I need between 15 kilometers to 16 kilometers delta V to get into orbit. Now intuitively, just adding another 3 to 4 kilometers per second doesn't sound that hard. But the biggest limiting factor under hacked gravity is the completely nerfed thrust to weight ratios of your engines. So the T45 engine under 3 times normal gravity can literally push a maximum of 360 units of liquid fuel plus the payload of your command pod and whatever. Trying to add any more fuel to that as a stage is actually subtracting delta V unless you add more engines to give you more thrust, which of course increases the mass of that stage, so you then need to add more fuel and more engines. Blah blah blah. See tyranny of the rocket equation. This has been explained by people far more qualified to explain it than I am, so many times I'm not going to do it again. The essential point I'm trying to make is that when gravity is 3 times as strong, the rocket equation is, naturally, 3 times as tyrannical. And with only 1.25 meter engines available, there is absolutely no way I'm getting into orbit without a VAB upgrade. So the plan for this episode is just to take whatever contracts I'll be able to do in the local area, because I've got 200,000 funds to raise somehow. And along the way I'll be trying to farm all the science I possibly can, because I'll want to unlock as many of the rocketry nodes as possible, since having bigger fuel tanks will help a bit with the part count, and I'm going to want yellow pipes for obvious reasons. Though I'm not sure there's actually enough science to get those within 50 kilometers of the space center, but we'll see. And this is going to be fun. And by fun I mean tedious, or grindy as they say in popular vernacular. So you won't mind if I montage this, I'm sure. So Jeb bravely headed west to test a heat shield at ridiculous speeds. And yeah, you saw it here. A part testing contract that actually makes some kind of sense. Not like your usual test this air breathing engine on the surface of the Mun. Then after slowing down to a safe parachute velocity, I was delighted to find myself coming down over the mountains. But alas, I hadn't packed enough chutes to counteract the mass of that science, Julia. So all I got for my efforts was Jeb's cockpit poetry. Not to be deterred, I was careful in my next launch to include landing gear in the design of the upper stage. But apparently 3 micro landing legs simply wasn't enough. I blame the mass of that tourist. Determined not to be beaten by anything so boring as gravity, I then packed one absolute love load of parachutes and headed out to sea. And with the addition of 2 extra radial chutes, I was able to slow down to 5 meters per second for a nice and gentle water recovery. Now I am aware that all this science farming on the surface of Kerbal is an object of some controversy in KSP forums. Not everyone thinks it makes a great deal of sense that you would use rockets to explore the surface of your home planet. Indeed, many think this makes no sense whatsoever. No sense at all. And they're right. It does make no sense whatsoever for a Terran. Now I'm not sure quite what the dictionary definition for Terra is, but I'm pretty sure it basically means land. And human beings, being land animals, naturally conceptualize space as being everything that's above their planet's atmosphere. Kerbals, however, are quite clearly some sort of aquatic species. How do I know this? Well, you may have noticed that apart from the Kerbal Space Center itself and that little airstrip on that one island, the surface of Kerbal is entirely devoid of any signs of advanced industrial civilization. So unless you choose to believe that Kerbal's just went from their Stone Age to suddenly be building rockets and exploring space overnight, the only way to make sense of this is to suppose that Kerbals evolved underwater, and you have to look under the waterline to find their cities and population centres and so on. Furthermore, you may have noticed that Kerbals all share the same surname, which is highly suggestive of their being hatched in some big underwater Kerbal spawn, which fits in quite nicely with the colloquial term for Kerbals, space frogs. So my point is that Kerbals quite naturally conceptualize space as being everything that's above the waterline, and so it makes perfect sense to them that you would use rockets to explore the surface of your own planet, because to them the surface is another part of space. Now you may then ask me, when the Kerbals are done exploring their own planet with rockets, how do they recover their capsules? With another rocket? Well, I don't really have an answer to that, but you do have to admit that that killed 3.5 minutes. So, moving swiftly on, let's just talk in all seriousness about how challenging doing this stuff in triple gravity really is. So the standard vehicle I was launching at this stage uses 7 Thumper SRBs as its first stage, and then has 2 or 3 liquid fuel tanks and a T45 engine for the second stage. If you draw a line from the Space Center to the mountain range west of the Space Center and use that line as a radius to draw a circle, that gives you the effective radius in which this vehicle can operate safely. And by safely I mean with any standing chance of ever recovering your pilot. Trying to go any further than that radius forces you to exceed 14 kilometers per second while still quite low in the atmosphere, and that of course just leads to everything attached to your spacecraft being incinerated. This caused me quite a few problems because I ended up funding my launches mostly through observational survey contracts. And you know how the contract system works. If you take out a lot of a particular type of contract, the game thinks it's because you love doing those contracts and you want more and harder of the same contract in the future. So of course, as I kept doing survey contracts, the game just kept giving me more survey contracts and giving them to me much further away from the Space Center. So to avoid sending Kerbals on suicide missions just to stay fiscally solvent, I pretty much had to spend about 20 rep declining contracts. Now when it came to recovering any science parts, so long as the mass of what you were trying to recover didn't much exceed the mass of a Mark 1 command pod, there wasn't really a problem. But as you'll have noticed earlier, trying to recover a Science Junior certainly took some thinking about. And what I noticed pretty quickly is that when launching with a Science Junior that you intend to recover, there is a very restrictive maximum safe altitude for free fall into recovery at about 30 kilometers. The reason for this being that when you're trying to recover a command pod and a Science Junior, it's really quite important to launch your drogue chutes as soon as you cut your engines. If you allow yourself to free fall, even if it's only for 20 seconds, the combined mass of those two parts will cause you to accelerate toward the ground so quickly that you will never slow down to a safe chute launching velocity again. So the trick for getting science juniors to an unexploited biome is basically to get yourself an apoapse between 20 and 25 kilometers above wherever you want to go, then quickly turn around as soon as you reach your apoapse, burn your engines until they're dry, and launch your drogue chutes as soon as you drop your engine stage. Bearing in mind that I was averaging 1,000 kilometers per second at apoapse on these missions, obviously if you try going below 20 kilometers, you're going to find it very hard to turn your rocket around, and you're not going to be able to slow yourself down. Going any higher, like I said, you won't be able to launch your chutes in time. Did I just say 1,000 kilometers per second? I'm so sorry, I meant 1,000 meters per second. I so clearly meant meters. But anyway, the point is, I'm actually making this look a whole lot easier than I have any right to. Because I actually killed Jeb about 15 times in the making of this episode. But I had to cut something from the final draft, and had I included footage of all my failures, this would have been a 3-hour video. Now, not everything was against me. If you get a VIP to High G Adventure contract, it's actually so much easier under hacked gravity than not. You just launch straight up to 20 kilometers. Let yourself free fall. Don't exceed 800 meters per second, because that's the death speed. And launch your drogues. Unfortunately, I only managed to get a couple of those. The game has a natural preference for the other kind of tourist contract, which under hacked gravity I don't think I'll find a way to do. But anyway, after a couple of hours gameplay, which was nowhere near as tedious as I thought it would be, if only because it was so absolutely blood-curdlingly dangerous, I'm pretty much there, and just need another 20,000 funds before I can think seriously about going for orbit. And if I go into mission control and take out the 2 contracts I was saving for the end of this episode, there you see, the advances help me cross that threshold of 450k. Time then to wrap this up. First I go to deliver this booster to 50 kilometers. Now I've somehow managed to farm all the available science from all the nearby biomes, except for the highlands. When I tried to hit the highlands before, somehow I just got drawn into the mountains. I know this is confirmation bias, but it's like when you hack gravity up, the mountains acquire some sort of magical magnetic force. Well, I cannot let this cosmic oversight go unpunished for very long, so I'm using this flight to redress that balance. So first I climb to 50 kilometers, then point myself west, accelerate to the speed for the contract parameter, and then put myself on a free fall trajectory heading toward the highlands. Now, one of the few good things about triple strength gravity is that when you're trying to free fall to any specific point through an atmosphere, your final trajectory is going to be a lot closer to the original trajectory that you set, because of course you're going to decelerate a lot slower. So you are in fact more likely to land where you want to, assuming you can survive the descent. Mission accomplished. And finally, the launch of Ascension. I don't even know anymore. I've lost count and frankly any interest. This is essentially a mission to retrieve some goo samples from low space, funded by Rocamax's desire to test some crappy radial engines on a suborbital trajectory. For reasons as stated earlier, of course I'm not bothering with the Science Junior. That's gonna have to wait till I can afford to upgrade the astronaut complex. Now, remember what I said earlier about the triple tyranny of the rocket equation? I was so lucky that the parts needing testing in that contract were some sort of engine. Basically, it was impossible to get them up there as dead weight. I needed to add more fuel to get the extra mass up to the altitude, but having added more fuel, I then of course needed to use the engines to get the thrust I needed to push the extra fuel. So despite this rocket obviously massing more than Ascension 9, I'm not convinced it really has any more delta V. At least if there is any difference in delta V between the two craft, it's so marginal that it's imperceptible to me. And to clarify, I'm talking now about actual delta V for triple strength gravity, not equivalent delta V under normal grav. But hey, we made it up here. Again. And now the only question is, was it a good idea to tack those mystery goo samples onto the side of that command pod? Or will the extra mass spell doom for the pilot on the way down? Well, you know what I have to do now. It needs to be one of these.